Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be taking a look at the Super Tuesday primaries that are happening today. We'll be getting results tonight, and I'll be giving some predictions, some thoughts. For these primaries, we have a good chunk of states that are up today. It'll be an interesting day. I read that about 36% of total GOP primary delegates will be awarded tonight, so over a third of delegates at stake for the convention come the summer will be decided tonight in these primaries. And though Donald Trump cannot, I believe, mathematically clinch the nomination, barring something very, very crazy happening tonight, he can, I think, be in a position where Nikki Haley has no choice but to drop out if he does well. But there's also a scenario where Nikki Haley, maybe wins a state or two, comes closer in some other states, wins more delegates than people think, and then she gets some momentum. So let's talk about it. I have filled out an electoral map with red and blue states. This doesn't mean Democrat or Republican. The blue states, as you can see, are labeled competitive. The red states are just labeled solidly for Trump. And again, the number values you see here are just the electoral votes. I didn't think to turn them off, but they don't matter. I'm not going to do a delegate-by-delegate prediction because every state has different delegate rules, and predicting delegates is very tedious. It's also just not very productive in a non-competitive primary like this. If it was, a 2020 Democratic primary kind of primary where, the eve before Super Tuesday, there was a case for Bernie Sanders to be favored to be the nominee. There's a case for Joe Biden to be favored. It was all around a competitive primary. Then I would be doing it. But this is still a primary Donald Trump's going to win. We're only talking about a few states tonight, or this morning, I guess. So, yeah, there are varying degrees of competitiveness. Obviously, not every state that I've labeled as competitive, I think Nikki Haley has a good chance in. Like Colorado, for example, I'd be shocked if she won it, but I do think that she's going to crack 40, maybe 43 or 44 on a good night for her. And that's because I believe in the state of Colorado to start out here. Everyone, I think, is automatically registered as an independent, so they get both ballots, and they get to pick whether they want to vote in the Democratic or Republican primary. And if there's people who maybe lean left or don't really like Trump, as many people in Colorado is a pretty progressive state, and they just get mailed their ballot or they see their ballot and they're automatically registered to vote, they might think, why not vote against Trump if I have the chance to? That's going to probably boost Haley, especially in the Denver area. There are also a good amount of registered independents in the Denver suburbs that are they're Democratic voters. And this is a concept I'll be talking about a lot today. It's kind of fake independents, where they're people who are registered independent, but really they're not independent. They will either vote 90% of the time with the Republicans or 90% of the time with the Democrats. It just depends on who you are. And a lot of people know this. They're registered as independents because they like to have the pick of which primary they vote in every couple of years, or they just don't really like to be affiliated with the party because they don't want to be tied to that party, but they will vote for that party in almost every election come November. And in Colorado, there's a good amount of these voters, especially in the Denver area. And again, this is very common in the suburbs in terms of Democrats. They're registered independents, but they've been voting Democrat for the past 10 years pretty consistently. And so these voters, if they're getting the GOP primary ballot or have the choice to pick the GOP primary ballot, they're likely going to vote for Nikki Haley. So is she going to win Colorado? Very likely not. Trump's still going to do well enough in the rural areas, and he's still going to do well enough with this electorate to hold on to it by a couple points. But there is a scenario in which this comes closer than people think, and I think, Colorado could, this one could be interesting. Maybe she'll get 41% of the vote. That's probably where I would expect her to fall in the state. And she did better, I would say, than I expected in some, not in Michigan, but in some of the previous primaries. She did a little better than I thought she'd do in South Carolina. So I'll give her a little bit of credit. The polls have been overestimating Trump a tad bit as of late, even though he did do very well in Michigan, to his credit. So we're now going to go over to our next competitive state, which is Virginia. By the way, the red states I'm not going to talk too much about. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. The only one you might be a little curious about is Utah, which you might expect to be pretty bad for Trump because it was not good for him in the past. In 2016, he had a lot of trouble there. But it's a caucus, which will help him. So maybe it'll be weirdly close. Probably not. It's not worth really getting into. If it were a primary, I think there'd be a chance for Haley to make some noise there. But it is a caucus, and for that reason, I think Trump will be fine. But yeah, to go back to our competitive states, next will be Virginia. Virginia is interesting because I think we've had a couple close polls there, which might be surprising because, you might think that Trump would do well everywhere outside of Nova, which is already pretty Democratic anyways. But like Colorado, and you'll notice this with a lot of left-trending states that used to be, Colorado and Virginia, what do they have in common? They're both growing. They're both getting bluer at pretty fast rates, and they both voted for George W. Bush twice and are now, voted for Biden by 10% last time. They'll probably vote for him by a similar amount. Especially Colorado is going to vote for him by a lot in 2020 or come November. But Virginia, like Colorado, has a lot of those independent voters that are really just Democrats, and they're going to break for Haley. These voters likely residing in the Nova area. Again, that's it's part of Virginia right south of D.C., or maybe in Richmond, the more educated areas in general. And then Haley also, I think, kind of has the underrated Southern appeal in Virginia because she does do well with educated Southern voters who might be more conservative. They might be Republicans, but they don't really love Trump, or at least he wouldn't be their first choice in a primary, even if they will vote for him in a general. I think you're going to see a lot of these voters in the more conservative, moderate parts of Virginia, like Virginia Beach. Down here, this is a swing district. That's where Jen Kagan's unseated a Democratic incumbent in November of 2022. And there are a lot of registered Republican voters or independents who, are voting in the Republican primary who, whether or not they're going to vote for Trump in November, will probably prefer Haley on a GOP primary ballot. Does that mean she'll win Virginia? No. It's a bit more likely than her winning Colorado just based on the polls, but it just doesn't – there's not really a path to her, I think, cracking 45, 46. But she will get a good chunk. Again, I'd be pretty surprised if she doesn't get more – if she doesn't in general, I'd be surprised if she doesn't, crack 40%. It'd be pretty bad for her if she's only in the 30s here. But she has the momentum. She actually did win the D.C. primary on Saturday, which was very interesting because only 2,000 people voted in it, and she won it, roughly 2-1. I think she got like 1,200 votes. Trump got 600. I think Chris Christie got a weirdly large amount of votes, but that's that's mostly because these are more moderate political, staffers and people who work in Capitol Hill. And D.C. is a very liberal area. I think Biden won like 94% of the vote there in 2020. It's super educated. It's very progressive. It's also pretty wealthy. So the Republicans that do live there, the handful tend to be more, moderate, or at least moderate socially, and not prefer Trump. So, D.C. doesn't say a lot, but if there's an area, on Super Tuesday that's most similar to D.C., it's just the suburbs in Virginia. A lot of government workers there, a lot of moderate Republicans there, if they do work in D.C., who would probably prefer Haley. And then the rest of these states are in New England. And that's because New England is the most moderate part of the country. I would say just in general, both Democrats and Republicans from this region tend to be, not super progressive. I know Bernie Sanders is the obvious exception to that, but I think when you look at the way that these states are governed, they're not, necessarily, or the parties in these states not necessarily the most, liberal or conservative of their respective bunch. I would say, except for maybe Massachusetts, these states are all governed pretty moderately. And again, Vermont has arguably the most, politically interesting governor in the country because he is a Republican, but is still pretty liberal on most issues. Phil Scott, I would say. But regardless, putting ideology aside for a second, Vermont, I think Haley's going to win. That is the only state I think she's outright favored to win today. I say that because I think both this is an open primary. I think independents and Democrats can vote. They're going to cross over and vote for her, especially Democrats, because there's no, Biden is going to be the nominee, and I think unless there was a clear indicator of Dean Phillips or someone gaining momentum, we would likely see, or, unless that happened, we're going to see Democrats care less and less about Biden on the ballot and more about beating Trump. And a good way for them to do that is to vote in what is perceived to be the more competitive primary, which is the GOP primary. So a lot of Democrats can vote for Haley. Independents are going to vote for Haley. Vermont also has a weird Republican base. There are a good amount of registered Republicans in Vermont who are really just independents or even have voted Democrat. They're going to vote for Haley too. So I think that she'll got to win Vermont. It'll be close. I wouldn't be shocked if Trump does win it. But, Haley should probably win this primary by a couple points. Maybe something like 52 to 46 she'll win it. Again, won't matter that much because Vermont's a small state, has a very, it's very liberal too, so there's a very small GOP electorate, so there's not a lot of delegates at stake there, but it'll be nice for her to get a win there. Then the last two states, we got Maine's 1st District in Massachusetts. Maine's 1st District, by the way, is just total, just me throwing darts, kind of at the wall here, seeing what sticks. This district, I think, could totally be a blowout for Trump. It could also be close. I'm saying it because it's kind of it's liberal, it's New Englandy, it's in the southern part of Maine. It's where most of the people in Maine live. As you can see, it's geographically smaller than the more rural northern district. It's where Portland is. It's the seat was the only or this district was the only district in 2020 to vote against Susan Collins in a Maine Senate race in a good amount of time. So it does tend to vote Democratic, and I think that depending on the rules of Maine's primary, which I am not educated enough to comment on, but if Democrats can vote, if this is an open primary, we would likely see a swing in favor of Haley. Now, if it's only Republicans and independents that can vote, Trump will probably win it, but because this just is interesting and because it's has a lot of room for weird things to happen, I just thought I'd talk about it. But the last one, I think the most competitive primary of the night is Massachusetts. This one, I think, is the closest thing to a toss-up as you can get, at least for this board. I would still favor Trump here, probably by a couple points, but I think Haley's got a shot. And that is because this Massachusetts does not allow Democrats to vote in Republican primaries, but independents can. And independents in Massachusetts, pretty liberal. In 2020, they voted for Biden by at least, I think, 25, 30 points. So that electorate alone is enough to boost Haley. The Republican electorate in Massachusetts, it's still, I'd say, pretty moderate compared to the average Republican electorate in any given state. Not to say that Republicans in Massachusetts are going to turn against Trump. They're still going to vote for him. But I would expect a good number of them, especially in the Boston area and the suburbs, which are obvious. It's a pretty blue region. I would expect the Republicans in that area to maybe move a little towards Haley. Another aspect of this is that Biden in 2020 did better than expected in Massachusetts. He won it despite the fact that Elizabeth Warren was from there. And again, that doesn't mean a lot for the GOP primary, but Biden probably isn't going to need anything out of Massachusetts the way he did earlier on, like out of Iowa or New Hampshire, or not really Iowa, but more so out of New Hampshire or out of South Carolina, I should say. And it's kind of like the same thing with Vermont. If Democrats or if independents who are really just Democrats see that and they're like, okay, well, I'm going to vote for Biden in November, but I do, I want to vote against Trump twice. How am I going to do that? I'm just going to vote for Haley in the primary if they're an independent. And I think that's going to happen. Now, will it be enough? Maybe, but I don't think so because, again, Democrats, I don't think, again, because Democrats can't vote, I don't think it'll be enough math just in terms of the raw votes for Haley, but she will come close. I think she'll probably get mid to high 40s here, and she'll probably, win a good amount of delegates unless the state's winner take all, in which she will win none if she loses the primary. But if it's proportional, if they're handed out proportionally, she'll win close to half of them. And so where does that put the race? Because obviously if Trump's going to win Colorado, Virginia, Maine, one, maybe, probably Massachusetts, Vermont, he'll probably lose. That would put him at a big advantage. He'd be close to winning the nomination. But would it be enough for Haley to drop out? And I think the answer is no, because she could, really piggyback off, or not piggyback, but, kind of build off a win in any state, whether it's Vermont or Massachusetts or wherever else, and keep it going. Because I think, and she's really made it clear that she doesn't like Trump both on a political and on a personal level. And I think that if she can go to the convention, if she can take this as long as possible, she will. And if she gets even any indicator from tonight's primaries that that's possible, she will have every reason to keep doing it. And so for that reason, unless I'm wrong, unless Haley loses all these states and it's not close anywhere, I think she stays in the race. So let me know what you think. Let me know if your state does a primary today, who you're voting for. If your state does have a primary today, by the way, please go vote, whether it's the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, or if you're an independent, pick your ballot, pick who you would like to vote for tonight. So, again, subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.